Welcome to part 2 of The Mystery of the Blue Train with Agatha Christie. So, I shall begin. Enjoy. If you want to catch up, you can catch up on Twitter if you're close, or YouTube if you're coming to this much later. Chapter 7. Letters. Mrs. Samuel Harfield presents her compliments to Miss Catherine Gray and wishes to point out that under the circumstances Miss Gray may not be aware. Mrs. Harfield, having written so far fluently, came to a dead stop, held up by what has proved an insuperable difficulty to many other people, namely, the difficulty of expressing oneself fluently in the third person. After a minute or two of hesitation, Mrs. Harfield tore up the notepaper and started afresh. Dear Miss Gray, whilst fully appreciating the adequate way you discharged your duties to my cousin Emma, whose recent death has indeed been a severe blow to us all, I cannot but feel... Again Mrs. Harfield came to a stop. Once more the latter was consigned to the waste-basket. It was not until 4 false starts had been made that Mrs. Harfield at last produced an epistle that satisfied her. It was duly sealed and stamped and addressed to Miss Catherine Gray, Little Crampton, St. Mary Mead, Kent, and it lay beside the lady's plate on the following morning at breakfast time, in company with a more important-looking communication in a long blue envelope. Catherine Gray opened Mrs. Harfield's letter first. The finished production ran as follows. Dear Miss Gray, my husband and I wish to express our thanks to you for your services to my poor cousin Emma. Her death has been a great blow to us, though we were, of course, aware that her mind had been failing for some time past. I understand that her latter testamentary dispositions have been of a most peculiar character, and they would not hold good, of course, in any court of law. I have no doubt that, with your usual good sense, you have already realized this fact. If these matters can be arranged privately, it is always so much better, my husband says. We shall be pleased to recommend you for a highly similar post, and hope that you will also accept a small present. Believe me, dear Miss Gray, yours cordially, Mary Ann Harfield. Catherine Gray read the letter through, smiled a little, and read it a second time. Her face, as she laid the letter down after the second reading, was distinctly amused. Then she took up the second letter. After one brief perusal, she laid it down and stared very straight in front of her. This time she did not smile. Indeed, it would have been hard for anyone watching her to guess what emotions lay behind that quiet, reflective gaze. Catherine Gray was 33. She came of good family, but her father had lost all his money, and Catherine had had to work for her living from an early age. She had been just 23 when she had come to old Mrs. Harfield as companion. It was generally recognized that old Mrs. Harfield was difficult. Companions came and went with startling rapidity. They arrived full of hope, and they usually left in tears. But from the moment Catherine Gray set foot in Little Crampton 10 years ago, perfect peace had reigned. No one knows how these things come about. Snake charmers, they say, are born, not made. Catherine Gray was born with the power of managing old ladies, dogs, and small boys, and she did it without any apparent sense of strain. At 23, she had been a quiet girl with beautiful eyes. At 33, she was a quiet woman with those same grey eyes, shining steadily out on the world with a kind of happy serenity that nothing could shake. Moreover, she had been born with, and still possessed, a sense of humour. As she sat at the breakfast table staring in front of her, there was a ring at the bell, accompanied by a very energetic rat-a-tat-tat on the knocker. In another minute, the little maidservant opened the door and announced rather breathlessly, "Dr. Harrison." The big, middle-aged doctor came bustling in with the energy and breeziness that had been foreshadowed by his onslaught on the knocker. "Good morning, Miss Gray." "Good morning, Dr. Harrison." I dropped in early, began the doctor, in case you should have heard from one of those half-field cousins. Mrs. Samuel, she calls herself, perfectly poisonous person. Without a word, Catherine picked up Mrs. Harfield's letter from the table and gave it to him. With a good deal of amusement, she watched his perusal of it. The drawing together of the bushy eyebrows, the snorts and grunts of violent disapproval. He dashed it down again on the table. Perfectly monstrous, he fumed. Don't you let it worry you, my dear. They're talking through their hat. Mrs. Harfield's intellect was as good as yours or mine, and you wouldn't get anyone to say the contrary. They wouldn't have a leg to stand on, and they know it. All that talk of taking it to court is pure bluff. Hence this attempt to get you round, put you in a hole and corner way. And look here, my dear, don't let them get you round, you with soft soap either. Don't get fancying it's your duty to hand over the cash, or any tomfoolery of conscientious scruples. I'm afraid it hasn't occurred to me to have scruples, said Catherine. All these people are distant relatives of Mrs. Harfield's husband, and they never came near her, or took any notice of her in her lifetime. You're a sensible woman, said the doctor. I know none better that you've had a hard life of it the last 10 years. You're fully entitled to enjoy the old lady's savings, such as they were. Catherine smiled thoughtfully. Such as they were, she repeated. You've no idea of the amount, Doctor? Well, enough to bring in 500 a year or so, I suppose. Catherine nodded. That's what I thought, she said. Now read this. She handed him the letter she had taken from the long blue envelope. The doctor read and uttered an exclamation of utter astonishment. Impossible! Impossible! She was one of the original shareholders in Mortals 40 years ago. She must have had an income of 8,000 or 10,000 a year. She has never, I'm sure, spent more than 400 a year. She was always terribly careful about money. I always believed that she was obliged to be careful about every penny. And all the time the income has accumulated at compound interest. My dear, you are going to be a very rich woman. Catherine Grey nodded. Yes, I am. She spoke in a detached, impersonal tone, as though she were looking at the situation from outside. Well, said the doctor, preparing to depart, you have all my congratulations. He flicked Mrs. Samuel Harfield's letter with his thumb. Don't worry about that woman and her odious letter. It really isn't an odious letter, said Mrs. Grey tolerantly. Under the circumstances, I think it's quite a natural thing to do. I have the gravest suspicions of you sometimes, said the doctor. Why? The things that you find perfectly natural. Catherine Grey laughed. Dr. Harrison retailed the great news to his wife at lunchtime. She was very excited about it. Fancy old Mrs. Harfield with all that money. I'm glad she left it to Catherine Grey. That girl's a saint. The doctor made a wry face. Saints, I always imagine, must have been difficult people. Catherine Grey is too human for a saint. She's a saint with a sense of humour, said the doctor's wife, twinkling. And though I don't suppose you've ever noticed the fact, she's extremely good-looking. Catherine Grey? The doctor was honestly surprised. She's got nice eyes, I know. Oh, you men, cried his wife. Blind as bats. Catherine's got all the makings of a beauty in her. All she wants is clothes. Clothes? What's wrong with her clothes? She always looks very nice. Mrs. Harrison gave an exasperated sigh, and the doctor rose preparatory to starting on his rounds. You might look in on her, Polly, he suggested. I'm going to, said Mrs. Harrison promptly. She made her call about 3 o'clock. My dear, I'm so glad, she said warmly as she squeezed Catherine's hand, and everyone in the village will be glad too. It's very nice of you to come and tell me, said Catherine. I hoped you would come in because I wanted to ask about Johnny. Oh, Johnny? Well, Johnny was Mrs. Harrison's youngest son. In another minute she was off, retailing a long history which Johnny's adenoids and tonsils balked largely. Catherine listened sympathetically. Habits die hard. Listening had been her portion for 10 years now. My dear, I wonder if I ever told you about the naval ball at Portsmouth when Lord Charles admired my gown. And composedly kindly, Catherine would reply, I rather think you have, Mrs. Harfield, but I've forgotten about it. Won't you tell me again? And then the old lady would start off full swing with numerous corrections and stops and remembered details. And half of Catherine's mind would be listening, saying the right things mechanically when the old lady paused. Now, with the same curious feeling of duality to which she was accustomed, she listened to Mrs. Harrison. At the end of half an hour, the latter recalled herself suddenly. I've been talking about myself all this time, she exclaimed, and I came here to talk about you and your plans. I don't know that I've got any yet. My dear, you're not going to stay on here. Catherine smiled at the horror of the other's tone. No, I think I want to travel. I've never seen much of the world, you know. I should think not. It must have been an awful life for you, cooped up here all these years. No, said Catherine. It gives me a lot of freedom. She caught the other's gasp and reddened a little. I sound foolish saying that. Of course, I hadn't much freedom in the downright physical sense. I should think not, breathed Mrs. Harrison, remembering that Catherine had seldom had that useful thing, a day off. But in a way, being tied physically gives you lots of scope mentally. You're always free to think. I've had a lovely feeling, always of mental freedom. Mrs. Harrison shook her head. Can't understand that. Oh, you would if you'd been in my place, but all the same, I feel I want to change. I want things to happen. Well, not to me, I don't mean that, but to be in the midst of things, exciting things. Even if I'm only the looker-on. You know, things don't happen in St. Mary's Mead. They don't indeed, said Mrs. Harrison with a fervour. I shall go to London first, said Catherine. I have to see the solicitors anyway. After that, I shall go abroad, I think. Very nice. But of course, first of all, yes, I must get some clothes. Exactly what I said to Arthur this morning, cried the doctor's wife. You know, Catherine, you could look possibly beautiful if you tried. Miss Grey laughed unaffectedly. Oh, I don't think you could ever make a beauty out of me, she said sincerely, but I shall enjoy having some really good clothes. I'm afraid I'm talking about myself an awful lot. Mrs. Harrison looked at her shrewdly. Must be quite a novel experience for you, she said dryly. Catherine went to say good-bye to old Miss Viner before leaving the village. Miss Viner was 2 years older than Mrs. Harfield, and her mind was mainly taken up with her own success in outliving her dead friend. You wouldn't have thought I'd have outlasted Jane Harfield, would you? She demanded triumphantly of Catherine. We were at school together, she and I, and here we are, she taken and I left. Who would have thought it? You've always eaten brown bread for supper, haven't you? Murmured Catherine mechanically. Fancy you remembering that, my dear. Yes, if Jane Harfield had a slice of brown bread evening, she might take a little less stimulant with her meal. She might be here today. The old lady paused, nodding her head triumphantly, and then added in sudden remembrance, And so you've come into a lot of money, I hear. Well, take care of it, and you're going up to London to have a good time. Don't think you'll get married, though, my dear, because you won't. You're not the kind to attract men, and besides, you're getting on. How old are you now? 33, Catherine told her. Well, remarked Miss Viner doubtfully, that's not so very bad. You've lost your first freshness, of course. I'm afraid so, said Catherine, much entertained. You're a very nice girl, said Miss Viner kindly. I'm sure there's many a man who might do worse than take you for a wife instead of one of those fibbity-gibbets running about nowadays, showing more of their legs than the Creator ever intended them to. Goodbye, my dear. I hope you'll enjoy yourself, but things are seldom what they seem in this life. Heartened by these prophecies, Catherine took her departure. Half the village came to see her off at the station, including the little maid of all work, Alice, who brought a stiff wired nosegay and cried openly. There ain't many like her, sobbed Alice when the train finally departed. I'm sure when Charlie went back on with me, with that girl from the dairy, nobody could be kinder than Miss Grey. And particularly about the brasses and the dust, she was always one to notice when you'd given things an extra rub. Cut myself in little pieces for her, I would, any day. A real lady, that's what I call her. Such was Catherine's departure from St. Mary Mead. Chapter 8. Lady Tamplin writes a letter. Well, said Lady Tamplin, well. She laid down the Continental Daily Mail and stared out across the blue waters of the Mediterranean. A branch of golden mimosa, hanging just above her head, made an effective frame for a very charming picture. Golden-haired, blue-eyed lady in a very becoming negligee. That the golden hair owed something to art, as did the pink and white complexion, was undeniable, but the blue of the eyes was nature's gift, and at 44, Lady Tamplin could still rank as a beauty. Charming as she looked, Lady Tamplin was, for once, not thinking of herself. That is to say, she was not thinking of her appearance. She was intent on graver matters. Lady Tamplin was a well-known figure on the Riviera, and her parties at the Villa Margherita were justly celebrated. She was a woman of considerable experience, and had 4 husbands. The first had been merely an indiscretion, and so was seldom referred to by the lady. He had had the good sense to die with commendable promptitude, and his widow thereupon espoused a rich manufacturer of buttons. He too had departed for another sphere 3 years of married life later, and it was said after a congenial evening with some boon companions. After him came Viscount Tamplin, who had placed Rosalie securely on those heights where she wished to tread. She retained her title when she married for a 4th time. This 4th venture had been undertaken for pure pleasure. Mr. Charles Evans, an extremely good-looking man of 27, with delightful manners, a keen love of sport, and an appreciation of this world's goods, had no money of his own whatsoever. Lady Tamplin was very pleased and satisfied with life generally, but she had occasional faint preoccupations about money. The button manufacturer had left his widow a considerable fortune, but as Lady Tamplin was wont to say, what with one thing and another, one thing being the depreciation of stocks owing to the war, and the other the extravagance of the late Lord Tamplin, she was still comfortably off, but to be merely comfortably off was hardly satisfactory to one of Rosalie Tamplin's temperament. So, on this particular January morning, she opened her blue eyes extremely wide as she read a certain item of news and uttered that non-committal monosyllable, well. The only other occupant of the balcony was her daughter, the Honourable Lennox Tamplin. A daughter such as Lennox was a sad thorn in Lady Tamplin's side. A girl with no kind of tact, who actually looked older than her age, and whose peculiar sardonic form of humour was, to say the least of it, uncomfortable. "Darling," said Lady Tamplin, "just fancy." "What is it?" Lady Tamplin picked up the Daily Mail and handed it to her daughter and indicated with an agitated forefinger the paragraph of interest. Lennox read it without any of the signs of agitation shown by her mother. She handed the paper back. "What about it?" she asked. "It is the sort of thing that is always happening. Cheese-paring old women are always dying in villages and leaving fortunes of millions to their humble companions." "Yes, dear, I know," said her mother, "and I dare say the fortune is not anything like as large as they say it is. Newspapers are so inaccurate. But even if you cut it down by half—" "Well," said Lennox, "it has not been left to us." "Not exactly, dear," said Lady Tamplin, "but this girl, Catherine Gay, is actually a cousin of mine. One of the Worcestershire Greys, the Edgeworth lot. My very own cousin. Fancy." "Aha," said Lennox. "And I was wondering," said her mother, "what there is in it for us," finished Lennox, with that sideways smile that her mother always found difficult to understand. "Oh, darling," said Lady Tamplin on a faint note of reproach. It was very faint, because Rosalie Tamplin was used to her daughter's outspokenness and to what she called Lennox's uncomfortable way of putting things. "I was wondering," said Lady Tamplin again, drawing her aristocratically pencilled brows together, "whether— Oh, good morning, Chubby, darling. Are you going to play tennis? How nice." Chubby, thus addressed, smiled kindly at her, remarked perfunctorily, "How topping you look in that peach-coloured thing," and drifted past them and down the steps. "The dear thing," said Lady Tamplin, looking affectionately after her husband. "Let me see, what was I saying? Ah, She switched her mind back to business once more. I was wondering. Oh, for God's sake, get on with it. That is the third time you said that. Well, dear, said Lady Tamblyn, I was thinking that it would be very nice if I wrote to dear Catherine and suggested that she should pay us a little visit out here. Suggested, naturally, she is quite out of touch with society. It would be nicer for her to be launched by one of her own people. An advantage for her and an advantage for us. How much do you think you would get her to cough up? Said Lennox. The mother looked reproachfully at her and murmured, We should have to come to some financial arrangement, of course. What with one thing and another? The war, your poor father. And Chubby now, said Lennox. He's an expensive luxury, if you like. She was a nice girl, as I remember her, murmured Lady Tamblyn, pursuing her own line of thought. Quite never wanted to shove herself forward. Not a beauty, never a man-hunter. You will leave Chubby alone, then, said Lennox. Lady Tamblyn looked at her in protest. Chubby would never, she began. No, said Lennox, I don't believe he would. He knows a jolly sight too well which way his bread is buttered. Darling, you have such a coarse way of putting things, said Lady Tamblyn. Sorry, said Lennox. Lady Tamblyn gathered up the Daily Mail and her negligee, a vanity bag, and various odd letters. I shall write to dear Catherine at once, she said, and remind her of the old days at Edgeworth. She went into the house, a light of purpose shining in her eyes. Unlike Mrs. Samuel Harfield, correspondence flowed easily from her pen. She covered 4 sheets without pause or effort, and on rereading found no occasion to alter a word. Catherine received it on the morning of her arrival in London. Whether she read between the lines of it or not is another matter. She put it in her handbag and started out to keep the appointment she had made with Mrs. Harfield's lawyers. The firm was an old established one in Lincoln's Inn Fields, and after a few minutes' delay Catherine was shown into the presence of the senior partner, a kindly, elderly man with shrewd blue eyes and a fatherly manner. They discussed Mrs. Harfield's will and various legal matters for some 20 minutes. Then Catherine handed the lawyer Mrs. Samuel's letter. I'd better show you this, I suppose, she said, though it is really rather ridiculous. He read it with a slight smile. Rather a crude attempt, Miss Grey, I need hardly tell you. I suppose that these people have no claim of any kind upon the estate, and if they endeavour to contest the will, no court will uphold them. I thought as much. Human nature is not always very wise. In Miss Samuel Harfield's place, I should have been more inclined to make an appeal to your generosity. That is one of the things I want to speak to you about. I should like a certain sum to go to these people. There is no obligation. I know that. And they will not take it in the spirit it is meant. They will probably regard it as an attempt to pay them off, though they will not refuse it on that account. I can see that, and it can't be helped. I should advise you, Miss Grey, to put the idea out of your mind. Catherine shook her head. You are quite right, I know, but I should like it done all the same. They will grab the money and abuse you all the more afterwards. Well, said Catherine, let them if they like. We all have our own ways of enjoying ourselves. They were, after all, Mrs. Harfield's only relatives, and though they despised her as a poor relation and paid no attention to her when she was alive, it seems to me unfair that they should be cut off with nothing. She carried her point, though the liar was still unwilling, and she presently went out into the streets of London with a comfortable assurance that she could spend money freely and make what plans she liked for the future. Her first action was to visit the establishment of a famous dressmaker. A slim, elderly Frenchwoman, rather like a dreaming duchess, received her, and Catherine spoke with a certain naivety. I want, if I may, to put myself in your hands. I have been very poor all my life, and I know nothing about clothes, but now I have come into some money, and I want to look really well dressed. The Frenchwoman was charmed. She had an artist's temperament, which had been soured earlier in the morning by a visit from an Argentine meat queen, who had insisted on having those models least suited to her flamboyant type of beauty. She scrutinized Catherine with keen, clever eyes. Yes. It will be a pleasure. Mademoiselle has a very good figure. For her simple lines will be best. She is also très anglaise. Some people it would offend them if I said that, but mademoiselle, no, un bel anglaise. There is no style more delightful. The demeanour of a dreaming duchess was suddenly put off. She screamed out directions to the various mannequins. Clothilde, Virginie, quickly, my little ones. The little tailleur gris clair, and the robe de soie, soupir d'automne. Marcel, my child, the little mimosa suit of crêpe de chine. It's a charming morning. Marcel, Clothilde, Virginie, bored and scornful, passed slowly around, squirming and wriggling all the time-honoured fashion of mannequins. The Duchess stood by Catherine and made entries into a small notebook. An excellent choice, mademoiselle. Mademoiselle has great goût. Yes, indeed, mademoiselle cannot do better than these little suits if she's going to the Riviera, as I suppose, this winter. Let me see that evening dress once more, said Catherine, the pink mauve one. Virginie appeared, circling slowly. That is the prettiest of all, said Catherine, as she surveyed the exquisite draperies of mauve and grey and blue. What do you call it? Soupir d'automne. Yes, that is truly the dress of mademoiselle. What was there in those words that came back to Catherine with a faint feeling of sadness after she had left the dressmaking establishment? Soupir d'automne. That is truly the dress of mademoiselle. Autumn. Yes, it was autumn for her. She who had never known spring or summer would never know them now. Something she had lost never could be given to her again, these years of servitude in St. Mary Mead, and all the while life passing by. I'm an idiot, said Catherine. I'm an idiot. What do I want? Why, I was more contented a month ago than I am now. She drew out of her handbag the letter she had received that morning from Lady Tamplin. Catherine was no fool. She understood the nuances of that letter as well as anybody, and the reason Lady Tamplin's sudden show of affection towards a long-forgotten cousin was not lost upon her. It was for profit and not for pleasure that Lady Tamplin was so anxious for the company of her dear cousin. Well, why not? There will be profit on both sides. I will go, said Catherine. He was walking down Piccadilly at that moment, and turned into Cook's to clinch the matter, then and there. She had to wait for a few minutes. The man with whom the clerk was engaged was also going to the Riviera. Everyone, she felt, was going. Well, for the first time in her life, she, too, would be doing what everybody did. The man in front of her turned abruptly, and she stepped into his place. He made her demand to the clerk. She made her demand to the clerk, but at the same time, half of her mind was busy with something else. The man's face, in some vague way, it was familiar to her. Where had she seen him before? And suddenly she remembered it was in the Savoy outside her room that morning. She had collided with him in the passage. Rather an odd coincidence that she should run into him twice in a day. She glanced over her shoulder, rendered uneasy by something, she knew not what. The man was standing in the doorway, looking back at her. A cold shiver passed over Catherine. She had a haunting sense of tragedy, of doom impending. Then she shook off the impression from her with her usual good sense, and turned her whole attention to what the clerk was saying. Chapter 9. An Offer Refused. It was rarely that Derek Kettering allowed his temper to get the better of him. An easy-going insouciance was his chief characteristic, and it had stood him in good stead in more than one tight corner. Even now, by the time he had left Mirel's flat, he had cooled down. He had need of coolness. The corner he was in now was a tighter one than he had ever been in before, and unforeseen factors had arisen, with which, for the moment, he did not know how to deal. He strolled along, deep in thought. His brow was furrowed, and there was none of the easy, jaunty manner which sat so well upon him. Various possibilities floated through his mind. It might have been said of Derek Kettering that he was less of a fool than he looked. He saw several roads that he might take. One in particular. If he shrank for it, it was for the moment only. Desperate ills need desperate remedies. He had gauged his father-in-law correctly. A war between Derek Kettering and Rufus van Alden could end only one way. Derek damned money and the power of money vehemently to himself. He walked up St. James's Street, across Piccadilly, and strolled along in the direction of Piccadilly Circus. As he passed the offices of Messrs. Thomas Cook and Son, his footsteps slackened. He walked on, however, still turning the matter over in his mind. Finally, he gave a brief nod of his head, turned sharply, so sharply as to collide with a couple of pedestrians who were following in his footsteps, and went back the way he had come. This time, he did not pass Cook's, but went in. The office was comparatively empty, and he got attended to at once. "I want to go to Nice next week. Will you give me particulars?" "What date, sir?" "The 14th. What is the best train?" "Well, of course, the best train is what they call the blue train. You avoid the tiresome customs business at Calais." Derek nodded. He knew all this, none better. "The 14th?" murmured the clerk. "That is rather soon. The blue train is nearly always booked up. Let's see if there's a berth left." If there is not, he left the sentence unfinished with a curious smile on his face. The clerk disappeared for a few minutes and presently returned. "That is all right, sir. Still 3 berths left. I will book you one of them. What's the name?" "Pavert," said Derek. He gave the address of his rooms in Jermyn Street. The clerk nodded, finished writing it down, wished Derek good morning politely, and turned his attention to the next client. "I want to go to Nice on the 14th. Isn't there a train called the Blue Train?" Derek looked round sharply. Coincidence? A strange coincidence. He remembered his own half-whimsical words to Morel. "Portrait of a lady with grey eyes. I don't suppose I shall ever see her again." But he had seen her again. And what was more, she proposed to travel to the Riviera on the same day as he did. Just for a moment a shiver passed over him. In some ways he was superstitious. He had said, half laughingly, that this woman might bring him bad luck. Suppose that should prove to be true. From the doorway he looked back at her as she stood talking to the clerk. For once his memory had not played him false. A lady in every sense of the word, not very young, not singly beautiful, but with something. Grey eyes that might perhaps see too much. He knew as he went out of the door that in some way he was afraid of this woman. He had a sense of fatality. He went back to his rooms in Jermyn Street and summoned his man. "Take this cheque to Pavert and go round to Cook's in Piccadilly. They will have some tickets there booked in your name. Pay for them and bring them back." "Very good, sir." Pavert withdrew. Derek strolled over to a side table and picked up a handful of letters. They were of a type only too familiar. Bills, small bills and large bills, one and all pressing for payment. The tone of the demands was still polite. Derek knew how soon that polite tone would change if certain news became public property. He flung himself moodily into a large leather-covered chair. Damned hole, that's what he was in. Yes, a damned hole. Ways of getting out of that damned hole were not too promising. Pavert appeared with a discreet cough. "A gentleman to see you, sir. Major Knighton." "Knighton, eh?" Derek sat up, frowned, and became suddenly alert. He said in a softer tone, almost to himself, "Knighton. I wonder what is in the wind now." "Shall I show him in, sir?" His master nodded. When Knighton entered the room, he found a charming and genial host waiting for him. "Very good of you to look me up," said Derek. Knighton was nervous. On the other's keen eyes noticed that at once. The errand on which the secretary had come was clearly distasteful to him. He replied almost mechanically to Derek's easy flow of conversation. Declined a drink, and if anything, his manner became stiffer than before. Derek appeared to notice it. "Well," he said cheerfully, "what does my esteemed father-in-law want with me? You've come on his business, I take it?" Knighton did not smile in reply. "I have, yes," he said carefully. I wish Mr. Van Alden had chosen someone else." Derek raised his eyebrows in mock dismay. "Is it as bad as all that?" "Not very thin-skinned, I can assure you, Knighton." "No," said Knighton, "but this—" He paused. Derek eyed him keenly. "Go on, out with it," he said kindly. "I can imagine my dear father-in-law's errands might not always be pleasant ones." Knighton cleared his throat and spoke formally, in tones that he strove to render free of any embarrassment. "I am directed by Mr. Van Alden to make you a definite offer." An offer? For a moment Derek showed his surprise. Knighton's opening words were clearly not what he had expected. He offered a cigarette to Knighton, lit one himself, and sank back in his chair, murmuring a slightly sardonic voice. An offer? Sounds rather interesting. Shall I go on? Please, you must forgive my surprise, but it seems to me that my dear father-in-law has rather climbed down since our chat this morning. And climbing down is not what one associates with strong men, Napoleons of finance, etc. I think it shows that he finds his position weaker than he thought. Knighton listened politely to the easy, mocking voice, but no sign of any kind showed itself on his rather stolid countenance. He waited until Derek had finished and then said quietly, I will state the proportion in the fewest possible words. Go on. Knighton did not look at the other. His voice was curt and matter-of-fact. The matter is simply this. Mrs. Kettering, as you know, is about to file a petition for divorce. If the case goes undefended, you will receive 100,000 on the day that the decree is made absolute. Derek, in the act of lighting his cigarette, suddenly stopped dead. 100,000? He said sharply. Dollars? Pounds? There was dead silence for at least 2 minutes. Kettering had his brows together, thinking. £100,000. It meant Morel and the continuance of his present careless life. It meant that Van Alden knew something. Van Alden did not pay for nothing. He got up and stood by the chimney-piece. And in the event of my refusing this handsome offer? He asked with a cold, ironical politeness. Knighton made a deprecating gesture. I can assure you, Mr. Kettering, he said earnestly, that it is with the utmost unwillingness that I came here with this message. That's all right, said Kettering. Don't distress yourself. It's not your fault. Now then, I asked you a question. Will you answer it? Knighton also rose. He spoke more reluctantly than before. In the event of your refusing this proposition, he said, Mr. Van Alden wished me to tell you that, in plain words, that he proposes to break you. Just that. Kettering raised his eyebrows, but retained his light, amused manner. Well, well, he said. Suppose he can do it. I certainly should not be able to put up much of a fight against America's man of many millions. 100,000. If you're going to bribe a man, there is nothing like doing it thoroughly, I suppose. Supposing I were to tell you that for 200,000 I'd do what he wanted, what then? I would take your message back to Mr. Van Alden, said Knighton unemotionally. Is that your answer? No, said Derek. Funny enough, it's not. You can go back to my father-in-law and tell him to take himself and his bribes to hell. Is that clear? Perfectly, said Knighton. He got up, hesitated, and then flushed. You will allow me to say something, Mr. Kettering? That I am glad you have answered as you have. Derek did not reply. When the other had left the room, he remained for a minute or two lost in thought. A curious smile came to his lips. That is that, he said softly. Chapter 10. On the Blue Train. Dad! Mrs. Kettering started violently. Her nerves were not completely under control this morning. Very perfectly dressed in a long mink coat and a little hat of Chinese lacquer red, she had been walking along the crowded platform of Victoria deep in thought, and her father's sudden appearance and hearty greeting had an unlooked for effect upon her. Why, Ruth, how you jumped! I didn't expect to see you, I suppose, Dad. You said goodbye to me last night, and you said you had a conference this morning. So I have, said Van Alden, but you are more to me than any number of darned conferences. I came to take a last look at you, since I'm not going to see you for some time. It's very sweet of you, Dad. I wish you were coming too. What would you say if I did? The remark was merely a joking one. He was surprised to see the quick colour flame out of Ruth's cheeks. For a moment he almost thought he saw dismay flash out of her eyes. She laughed uncertainly and nervously. Just for a moment I really thought you meant it, she said. Would you have been pleased? Of course. She spoke with exaggerated emphasis. Well, said Van Alden, that's good. It isn't really for a long time, Dad, continued Ruth. You know, you're coming out next month. Ah, said Van Alden unemotionally. Sometimes I guess I will go to one of these big guys in High Street and have him tell me that I need sunshine and a change of air right away. Don't be so lazy, Ruth cried. Next month is ever so much nicer than this month out there. You've got all sorts of things you can't possibly leave just now. Well, that's so, I suppose, said Van Alden with a sigh. You'd better get on the board this train of yours, Ruth. Where's your seat? Ruth Kettering looked vaguely up at the train as the door of one of the Pullman cars, a thin, tall woman dressed in black was standing. Ruth Kettering's maid. She drew aside as her mistress came up to her. I have put your dressing case under your seat, madam, in case you should need it. Shall I take the rugs, or will you require one? No, I shan't want one. Better go and find your own seat now, Mason. Yes, madam. The maid departed. Van Alden entered the Pullman car with Ruth. She found her seat, and Van Alden deposited various papers and magazines on the table in front of her. The seat opposite her was already taken, and the American gave a cursory glance to its occupant. He had a fleeting impression of attractive grey eyes and a neat travelling costume. He indulged in a little more desultory conversation with Ruth, the kind of talk peculiar to those seeing other people off by train. Presently, as whistles blew, he glanced at his watch. I'd best be clearing out of here. Goodbye, my dear. Don't worry, I will attend to things. Oh, father. He turned back sharply. There had been something in Ruth's voice, something so entirely foreign to her usual manner, that he was startled. There was almost a cry of despair. She had made an impulsive movement towards him, but in another minute she was mistress of herself once more. Till next month, she said carefully. 2 minutes later, the train started. Ruth sat very still, biting under her lip and trying hard to keep the unaccustomed tears from her eyes. She felt a sudden sense of horrible desolation. There was a wild longing upon her to jump out of the train and go back before it was too late. She, so calm, so self-assured, for the first time in her life, felt like a leaf swept by the wind. If her father knew, what would he say? Madness. Yes, just that, madness. For the first time in her life, she was swept away by emotion, swept away to the point of doing a thing which even she knew to be incredibly foolish and reckless. That she was his daughter in another sense also. She had that same iron determination that would have what it wanted, and once it had made up its mind, it would not be balked. From her cradle she had been self-willed. The very circumstances of her life had developed that self-will in her. It drove her now remorselessly. Well, the die was cast. She must go through with it now. She looked up, and her eyes met those of the woman sitting opposite. She had a sudden fancy that in some way this other woman had read her mind. She saw in those grey eyes understanding and, yes, compassion. It was only a fleeting impression. The faces of both women hardened to well-bred impassiveness. Mrs. Kettering took up a magazine, and Catherine Grey looked out of the window and watched the seemingly endless vista of depressing streets and suburban homes. Ruth found an increasing difficulty in fixing her mind on the printed page in front of her. In spite of herself, 1,000 apprehensions preyed on her mind. What a fool she had been! What a fool she was! Like all cool and self-sufficient people, when she did lose her self-control, she lost it thoroughly. It was too late. Was it too late? Oh, for someone to speak to, for someone to advise her. She had never before had such a wish. She would have scorned the idea of relying on any judgment other than her own, but now, what was the matter with her? Panic. Yes, that would describe it best. Panic. She, Ruth Kettering, was completely and utterly panic-stricken. She stole a covert glance at the figure opposite. If only she knew someone like that, someone nice, cool, calm, sympathetic creature. That was the sort of person one could talk to. But you can't, of course, confide in a stranger. And Ruth smiled to herself a little at the idea. She picked up the magazine again. Really, she must control herself. After all, she had thought all this out. She had decided of her own free will. What happiness had she ever had in her life up to now? She said to herself restlessly, why shouldn't I be happy? No one will ever know. It seemed no time before Dover was reached. Ruth was a good sailor. She liked the cold, and was glad to reach the shelter of the private cabin she had telegraphed for, although she would not have admitted the fact. Ruth was in some ways superstitious. She was of the order of people to whom coincidence appeals. After disembarking at Calais and settling herself down with her maid in her double compartment in the blue train, she went along to the luncheon car. It was with a little surprise and shock that she found herself sat down to a small table with, opposite her, the same woman who had been her vis-à-vis in the Pullman. A faint smile came to the lips of both. "This is quite a coincidence," said Mrs. Kettering. "I know," said Catherine. "It is odd the way things happen." A flying attendant shot up to them, with the wonderful velocity always displayed by the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lits, and deposed 2 cups of soup. By the time the omelette succeeded the soup, they were chatting together in friendly fashion. "It will be heavenly to get into the sunshine," sighed Ruth. "I am sure it will be a wonderful feeling. You know the Riviera well?" "No, this is my first visit." "Fancy that. You go every year, I expect." "Practically. January and February in London are horrible. I have always lived in the country. They're not very inspiring months there, either. Mostly mud." "What made you suddenly decide to travel?" "Money," said Catherine. "For 10 years I have been a paid companion with just enough money of my own to buy myself strong country shoes. Now I have been left with what seems to me a fortune, although I dare say it would not seem so much to you." "I wonder why you would say that." "That it would not seem so to me?" Catherine laughed. "I don't really know. I suppose one forms impressions without thinking of it. I put you down in my own mind as one of the very rich of the earth." "It was just an impression. I dare say I'm wrong." "No," said Ruth, "you're not wrong." She had suddenly become very grave. "I wish you would tell me what other impressions you formed about me." Ruth swept on, disregarding the other's embarrassment. "Oh, please, don't be conventional. I want to know. As we left Victoria, I looked at you and had the sort of feeling that, well, you understood what was going on in my mind." "I can assure you I am not a mind reader," said Catherine, smiling. "No. But will you tell me, please, just what you thought?" Ruth's eagerness was so intense and so sincere that she carried her point. "I will tell you if you like, but you must not think me impertinent. I thought that, for some reason, you were in a great distress of mind, and I was sorry for you." "You're right, you're quite right. I'm in a terrible trouble. I should like to tell you something about it, if I may." "Oh dear," Catherine thought to herself. "How extraordinary alike the world seems to be everywhere. People were always telling me things in St. Mary's Mead, and it's just the same thing here. I don't really want to hear anybody's troubles." She replied politely, though. "Do tell me." They were just finishing their lunch. Ruth gulped down her coffee, rose from her seat, and, quite oblivious to the fact that Catherine had not begun to sip her coffee, said, "Come to my compartment with me." They were 2 single compartments with a communicating door between them, and in the second of them a thin maid, whom Catherine had noticed at Victoria, was sitting very upright on the seat, clutching a very big scarlet morocco case with the initials RVK on it. Mrs. Kettering pulled down the communicating door and sank down into the seat. Catherine sat down beside her. "I'm in trouble, and I don't know what to do. There is a man who I'm very fond of indeed. We cared for each other when we were young, and we were thrust apart most brutally and unjustly. Now we've come together again." "Yes?" I'm going to meet him now." "Oh, I dare say you think this is all wrong, but you don't know the circumstances. My husband is impossible. He's treated me disgracefully." "Yes," said Catherine again. "What I feel so badly about is this. I deceived my father. It was he who came to see me off at Victoria today. He wishes me to divorce my husband, and of course he has no idea that I'm going to meet this other man. He would think it extraordinarily foolish." "Well, don't you think it is?" I suppose it is." Ruth Kettering looked down at her hands. They were shaking violently. "But I can't draw back now." "Why not?" It is all arranged, and it would break his heart." "Don't you believe it," said Catherine robustly. "Hearts are pretty tough." "He will think I have no courage, no strength of purpose." "It seems to me an awfully silly thing that you are going to do," said Catherine. "I think you realise that yourself." Ruth Kettering buried her face in her hands. I don't know. I don't know. Ever since I left Victoria, I've had this horrible feeling of something that is coming to me very soon that I can't escape. She clutched convulsively at Catherine's hand. You must think I'm mad talking to you like this, but I tell you I know something horrible is going to happen. Don't think it, said Catherine. Try to pull yourself together. You could send your father a wire from Paris if you like. He would come to you at once. The other brightened up. Yes, I could do that. Dear old Dad. It's queer, but I never knew until today how horribly fond of him I am. She sat up and dried her eyes with a handkerchief. I've been very foolish. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you. I don't know why I got in such a queer, hysterical state. She got up. I'm quite all right now, I suppose. Really, I just needed someone to talk to. I can't think now why I've been making such an absolute fool of myself. Catherine got up too. I'm glad you're feeling better, she said, trying to make her voice sound as conventional as possible. She was only too aware that the aftermath of confidence is embarrassing. She added tactfully, I must be going back to my own compartment. She emerged into the corridor at the same time as the maid, who was also coming out from next door. The latter looked towards Catherine over her shoulder, and an expression of intense surprise showed itself on her face. Catherine turned also, but by that time, whoever it was who had aroused the maid's interest had retreated into his or her compartment, and the corridor was empty. Catherine walked down it to regain her own place, which was in the next coach. As she passed the end of the compartment, the door opened and a woman's face looked out for a moment and then pulled the door sharply. It was a face not easily forgotten, as Catherine was to know when she saw it again. A beautiful face, oval and dark, very heavily made up in a bizarre fashion. Catherine had a feeling that she had seen it before somewhere. She regained her own compartment without another adventure, and she sat for some time thinking of the confidence which she had just been made to her. She wondered idly who the woman in the mink coat might be, wondered also how the end of her story would turn out. If I had stopped anyone from making an idiot of themselves, I suppose I've done good work, she thought to herself. But who knows? That is the kind of woman who is hard-headed and egotistical all her life. It might be good for her to do the other sort of thing for a change. Oh well, I don't suppose I shall ever see her again. She certainly won't want to see me again. That is the worst of letting people tell you things they never do. She hoped that she would not be given the same place at dinner. She reflected, not without humour, that it might be awkward for both of them. Leaning back with her head against the cushion, she felt tired and vaguely depressed. They had reached Paris, and the slow journey around the Ceinture, with its interminable stops and waits, was very wearisome. When they arrived at the Gare de Lyon, she was glad to get out and walk up and down the platform. The keen, cold air was refreshing, and after the steam-heated train, she observed with a smile that her friend of the mink coat was solving the possible awkwardness of the dinner problem in her own way. A dinner basket was being handed up and received through the window by the maid. When the train started once more and dinner was announced by a violent ringing of bells, Catherine went along to it very much relieved in her mind. Her vis-à-vis tonight was of an entirely different kind. A small man, distinctly foreign in appearance, with a rigidly waxed moustache and an egg-shaped head, which he carried rather on one side. Catherine had taken in a book to dinner with her. She found the little man's eyes fixed upon it with a kind of twinkling amusement. I see, madame, that you have a roman policier. You are fond of such things? They amuse me, Catherine admitted. The little man nodded with an air of complete understanding. They always have a good sale, so I'm told. Now, why is that, mademoiselle? I ask you as a student of human nature, why should that be? Catherine felt more and more amused. Perhaps they give one the illusion of living an exciting life, she suggested. He nodded gravely. Yes, there is something in that. Of course, one knows that such things don't really happen, Catherine was continuing, but he interrupted sharply. Sometimes, mademoiselle, sometimes. I who speak to you, they have happened to me. She threw him a quick, interested glance. Some day, who knows, you might be in the thick of things, he went on. It is all chance. I don't think it likely, said Catherine. Nothing of that kind ever happens to me. He leaned forward. Would you like it to? The question startled her. and she drew in her breath sharply. "It is my fancy, perhaps," said the little man, as he dexterously polished one of the forks, "but I think you have a yearning in you for interesting happenings. Eh bien, mademoiselle, all through my life I have observed one thing. All one wants, one gets. Who knows?" His face screwed itself up comically. "You may get more than you bargain for." "Is that a prophecy?" asked Catherine, smiling as she rose from the table. The little man shook his head. "I never prophesy," he declared promptly. "It is true that I have the habit of always being right, but I do not boast of it. Good night, mademoiselle, and may you sleep well." Catherine went back along the train, amused and entertained by her little neighbour. She passed the open door of her friend's compartment and saw the conductor making up the bed. The lady in the mink coat was standing looking out of the window. The second compartment, as Catherine saw through the communicating door, was empty, with rugs and bags heaped upon the seat. The maid was not there. Catherine found her own bed prepared, and since she was tired, she went to bed and switched off her light about 9:30. She woke with a sudden start. How much time had passed she did not know. Glancing at her watch, she found that it had stopped. A feeling of intense uneasiness pervaded her and grew stronger moment by moment. At last she got up, threw on her dressing gown round her shoulders, and stepped out into the corridor. The whole train seemed wrapped in slumber. Catherine let the window down, and sat by it for some minutes, drinking in the cool night air, and trying vainly to calm her uneasy fears. She presently decided that she would go along to the end and ask the conductor for the right time so that she could set her watch. She found, however, that his little chair was vacant. She hesitated for a moment and then walked through the door to the next coach. She looked down the long, dim line of the corridor and saw to her surprise that a man was standing with his hand on the door of the compartment occupied by the lady in the mink coat. That is to say, she thought it was a compartment. Probably, however, she was mistaken. He stood there for a moment or two, with his back to her, seeming uncertain and hesitating in his attitude. Then he slowly turned, with an odd feeling of fatality. Catherine recognized him as the man whom she had noticed twice before, once in the corridor of the Savoy Hotel and once in Cook's offices. Then he opened the door of the compartment and passed in, drawing it to behind him. An idea flashed across Catherine's mind. Could this be the man of whom the other woman had spoken, the man she was journeying to meet? Then Catherine told herself that she was romancing. In all probability she had mistaken the compartment. She went back to her own carriage. 5 minutes later, the train slackened speed. There was a long, plaintive hiss of the Westinghouse brake, and a few minutes later, the train came to stop. Lyon. Chapter 11. Murder. Catherine wakened the next morning to a brilliant sunshine. She went along to breakfast early, but met none of her acquaintances of the day before. When she returned to her compartment, it had just been restored to its daytime appearance by the conductor, a dark man with a drooping moustache and a melancholy face. "Madame is fortunate," he said. "The sun shines, and it is always a great disappointment to passengers when they arrive on a grey morning." "I should have been disappointed, certainly," said Catherine. The man prepared to depart. "We are rather late, madame," he said. "I will let you know just before we get to Nice." Catherine nodded. She sat by the window, entranced by the sunlit panorama. The palm trees of the deep blue sea, the bright yellow mimosa, came with all the charm of novelty to the woman who for 14 years had known only drab winters of England. When they arrived at Cannes, Catherine got out and walked up and down the platform. She was curious about the lady in the mink coat and looked up at the windows of her compartment. The blinds were still drawn, the only ones to be so on the whole train. Catherine wondered a little, and when she re-entered the train she passed along the corridor and noticed that these two compartments were still shuttered and closed. The lady in the mink coat was clearly no early riser. Presently the conductor came to her and told her that in a few minutes the train would arrive at Nice. Catherine handed him a tip. The man thanked her, but still lingered. There was something odd about him. Catherine, who had at first wondered whether the tip had not been big enough, was now convinced that something far more serious was amiss. His face was of a sickly pallor. He was shaking all over and looked as if he had been frightened out of his life. He was eyeing her in a curious manner. Presently he said abruptly, Madam will excuse me, but is she expecting friends to meet her at Nice? Probably, said Catherine. Why? The man merely shook his head and murmured something that Catherine could not catch, and moved away, not reappearing until the train came to rest at the station, when he started handing her belongings down from the window. Catherine stood for a moment or two on the platform, rather at a loss. But a fair young man with an ingenious face came up to her and said rather hesitatingly, Miss Grey, is it not? Catherine said that it was, and the young man beamed at her seraphically and murmured, I'm Chubby, you know, Lady Tamplin's husband. I expect she mentioned me, but perhaps she forgot. Have you got your billet de bagage? I lost mine when I came out this year, and you would not believe the fuss they made about it. Regular French red tape. Catherine produced it, and was just about to move off beside him when a very gentle, insidious voice murmured in her ear. A little moment, madame, if you please. Catherine turned to behold an individual who made up for insignificance of stature by a large quantity of gold lace and uniform. The individual explained there were certain formalities. Madame would perhaps be so kind as to accompany him. The regulations of police. He then threw up his arms. Absurd, doubtless, but there it was. Mr. Chubby Evans listened with very imperfect comprehension, his French being of a limited order. So, like the French, murmured Mr. Evans, he was one of those staunch patriotic Britons who, having made a portion of the foreign country their own, strongly resented the original inhabitants of it. Always up to some silly dodge or other. They've never tackled people on the station before, though. This is something quite new. I suppose you'll have to go. Catherine departed with her guide. Somewhat to her surprise, he led her towards a sliding door where a coach of the departing train had been shunted. He invited her to mount into this and then preceded her down the corridor, held aside the door of one of the compartments. In it was a pompous-looking official personage, and with him a nondescript man who appeared to be a clerk. The pompous-looking personage rose politely and bowed to Catherine and said, You will excuse me, madame, but there are certain formalities to be complied with. Madame speaks French, I trust? Sufficiently, I think, monsieur, replied Catherine in that language. That is good. Pray be seated, madame. I am Monsieur Cause, the commissary of police. He bowed his chest importantly, and Catherine tried to look sufficiently impressed. You wish to see my passport? She inquired. Here it is. The commissary eyed her keenly and gave a little grunt. Thank you, madame, he said, taking the passport from her and cleared his throat. But what I really desire is a little information. Information? The commissary nodded his head slowly. About a lady who has been a fellow passenger of yours. You lunched with her yesterday. I'm afraid I can't tell you anything about her. We fell into conversation over our meal, but she is a complete stranger to me. I've never seen her before. And yet, said the commissary sharply, you returned to her compartment with her after lunch and sat talking for some time. Yes, said Catherine, that is true. The commissary seemed to expect her to say something more. He looked at her encouragingly. Yes, madame? Well, monsieur? You can perhaps give me some kind of idea of that conversation? Could, but at the moment I see no reason to do so. In a somewhat British fashion, she felt annoyed. This foreign official seemed to her impertinent. No reason? Cried the commissary. Oh, yes, madame, I can assure you there is a reason. Well, then perhaps you will give it to me. The commissary rubbed his chin thoughtfully for a minute or two, without speaking. Madame, he said at last, the reason is very simple. The lady in question was found dead in her compartment this morning. Dead? Asked Catherine. What was it? Heart failure? No, said the commissary in a reflective, dreamy voice. No, she was murdered. Murdered? Said Catherine. So you see, madame, why we are anxious for any information we can possibly get. But surely her maid. The maid has disappeared. Oh. Catherine paused to assemble her thoughts. Since the conductor had seen you talking with her in a compartment, he quite naturally reported the fact to the police. And that is why, madame, we have detained you in the hope of gaining some information. I'm very sorry, said Catherine. I don't even know her name. Her name is Catherine. That we know from her passport, and from the labels on her luggage. There was a knock at the door of the compartment. Monsieur Coase frowned. He opened it about 6 inches. "What is the matter?" he said peremptorily. "I cannot be disturbed." The egg-shaped head of Catherine's dinner acquaintance showed itself in an aperture. On his face he was a beaming smile. "My name," he said, "is Hercule Poirot." "Not," the commissary said, not the Hercule Poirot?" "The same," said Monsieur Poirot. "I remember meeting you once, Monsieur Co, at the Surete in Paris, though doubtless you've forgotten me." "Not at all, monsieur, not at all," declared the commissary heartily. "But enter, I pray you. You know of this?" "Yes, I know. I came to see if I might be of assistance." "You should be flattered," replied the commissary promptly. "Let me present you, Monsieur Poirot, to..." He consulted the passport he still held in his hand, to Mademoiselle Gray. Poirot smiled across at Catherine. "It is strange, is it not," he murmured, "that my words should have come through so quickly." "Mademoiselle, alas, can tell us very little," said the commissary. "I have been explaining," said Catherine, "that this poor lady was a complete stranger to me." Poirot nodded. "But she talked to you, did she not?" he said gently. "You formed an impression, is it not so?" "Yes," said Catherine, I suppose I did." "And that impression was—" "Yes, mademoiselle?" The commissary jerked his voice. "Let us, by all means, have your impressions." Catherine sat turning the whole thing over in her mind. She felt in a way as if she were betraying a confidence, but with the ugly word murder ringing in her ears, she dare not keep anything back. Too much might hang upon it. So, as nearly as she could, she repeated word for word the conversation she had with the dead woman. "That is interesting," said the commissary, glancing at the other. "Eh, Mr. Poirot, that is interesting. Whether it has anything to do with the crime..." He left the sentence unfinished. "I suppose it could not be suicide?" said Catherine rather doubtfully. "No," said the commissary, "it could not be suicide. She was strangled with a length of black cord." "Oh!" Catherine shivered. Monsieur Coase spread out his hands apologetically. "It is not nice, no. I think that our train robbers are more brutal than they are in your country." "It's horrible." Yes, he was soothing her. "But you have great courage, mademoiselle. At once, as soon as I saw you, I said to myself, mademoiselle has great courage. That is why I am going to ask you to do something more, something distressing, but I assure you it's very necessary." Catherine looked at him apprehensively. He spread out his hands apologetically. "I am going to ask you, mademoiselle, to be so good as to accompany me to the next compartment." "Must I?" asked Catherine in a low voice. "Someone must identify her," said the commissary, "and since the maid has disappeared," he coughed significantly, "you appear to be the only person who has seen most of her since she joined the train." "Very well," said Catherine quietly, if it is necessary." She rose. Poirot gave her a little nod of approval. "Mademoiselle is sensible," he said. "May I accompany you, Monsieur Co?" "Enchanted, my dear Poirot." They went out into the corridor, and Monsieur Co unlocked the door of the dead woman's compartment. The blinds on the far side had been drawn halfway up to admit light. The dead woman lay on the berth to the left, and so natural in a posture that one could have thought her asleep. The bedclothes were drawn up over her. Her head was turned to the wall, so that only the red auburn curls showed. Very gently, Monsieur Co laid a hand on her shoulder and turned the body back, so that the face came into view. Catherine flinched a little and dug her nails into her palms. A heavy blow had disfigured the features almost beyond recognition. Poirot gave a sharp exclamation. "When was that done, I wonder?" he demanded. "Before death or after?" "The doctor says after," said Monsieur Co. "Strange," said Poirot, drawing his brows together. He turned to Catherine. "Be brave, mademoiselle. Look at her well. Are you sure this is the woman you talked to in the train yesterday?" Catherine had good nerves. She steeled herself to look long and earnestly at the recumbent figure. Then she leaned forward and took up the dead woman's hand. "I am quite sure," she replied at length. "The face is too disfigured to recognize, but the build and carriage and hair are exact, and besides, I noticed this." She pointed to a tiny mole on the dead woman's wrist while I was talking to her. "Bon," approved Poirot. "You are an excellent witness, mademoiselle. There is then no question as to the identity, but it is strange all the same." He frowned down at the dead woman in perplexity. Monsieur Coe shrugged his shoulders. The murderer was carried away by rage, doubtless, he suggested. If she had been struck down, it would have been comprehensible, Miss Powell, but the man who strangled her slipped up behind and caught her unawares. A little choke, a little gurgle, that is all that would be heard, and nothing afterwards. A smashing blow in her face. Now why? Did he hope that if the face was unrecognizable, she might not be identified, or did he hate her so much that he could not resist striking a blow even after she was dead? Catherine shuddered, and he turned at once to her kindly. You must not let me distress you, mademoiselle, he said. To you this is all very new and terrible. To me, alas, it is an old story. One moment, I pray of you both. They stood against the door, watching him as he went quickly round the compartment. He noted the dead woman's clothes, neatly folded on the end of the berth, the big fur coat that hung from the hook, and the little red lacquer hat tossed on the rack. Then he passed through into the adjoining compartment, that in which Catherine had seen the maid sitting. Here the berth had not been made up. 3 or 4 rugs were piled loosely on the seat. There was a hat box and a couple of suitcases. He turned suddenly to Catherine. You were here yesterday, he said. Did you see anything change, anything missing? Catherine looked carefully around both compartments. Yes, she said, there is something missing, a scarlet morocco case. It had the initials RVK on it. It might have been a small dressing case or a big jewel case. When I saw it, the maid was holding it. Ah, said Pearl. But surely, said Catherine, of course, I don't know anything about such things, but surely it is plain enough if the maid and the jewel case are missing. You mean that it was the maid who was the thief? No, mademoiselle. There's a very good reason against that. What? The maid was left behind in Paris. He turned to Poirot. I should like you to hear the conductor's story yourself. He murmured confidently. It is very suggestive. Mademoiselle would doubtless like to hear it too, said Poirot. You do not object, monsieur le commissaire? No, said the commissary, who clearly did object very much. No, certainly, Mr. Poirot, if you say so. You have finished here? I think so. One little minute. He had been turning over rugs, and now he took one to the window and looked at it, picking something off with his fingers. What is it? Demanded Mr. Coe sharply. 4 auburn hairs. He bent over the dead woman. Yes, they are from the head of Madame. And what of it? Do you attach importance to them? Poirot let the rug drop back on the seat. What is important and what is not? I cannot say at this stage, but we must note each little fact carefully. They went back again into the first compartment, and in a minute or two the conductor of the carriage arrived to be questioned. Your name is Pierre Michel, said the commissary. Yes, monsieur le commissaire. I should like you to repeat to this gentleman, he indicated to Poirot, the story that you told me as to what happened in Paris. Very good, monsieur le commissaire. It was after we had left Gare de Lyon I came along to make the beds, thinking that madame would be at dinner, but she had a dinner basket in her compartment. She said to me that she had been obliged to leave her maid behind in Paris, so that I only need to make up one berth. I took a dinner basket into the adjoining compartment and sat there while I made the bed. She told me she did not wish to be wakened early in the morning, and that she liked to sleep on. I told her I quite understood, and she wished me good night. You yourself did not go into the adjoining compartment? No, monsieur. Then you did not notice to happen to notice if a scarlet morocco case was amongst the luggage there? No, monsieur, I did not. Would it have been possible for a man to have been concealed in the adjoining compartment? The conductor reflected. No, the door was half open, he said. If a man had stood behind the door, I should not have been able to see him, but he would, of course, have been perfectly visible to madame when she was in there. Quite so, said Poirot. Is there anything more you have to tell us? That is all, monsieur. I can remember nothing else. And now this morning, pondered Poirot. As madame had ordered, I did not disturb her. It was not until just before Cannes that I ventured to knock on the door. Getting no reply, I opened it. The lady appeared to be in her bed, asleep. I took her by the shoulder to rouse her, and then... Then you saw what had happened, volunteered Poirot. Très bien. I think I know all I want to know. I hope, monsieur le commissaire, that it is not that I have been guilty of any negligence, said the man piteously. Such an affair to happen on the blue train is horrible. Console yourself, said the commissary. Everything will be done to keep the affair as quiet as possible, if only in the interests of justice. I cannot think that you have been guilty of any negligence. And monsieur le commissaire will report as much to the company? But certainly, said Monsieur Legault impatiently. That would do now. The conductor withdrew. According to the medical evidence of the commissary, the lady was probably dead before the train reached Lyon. Who, then, was the murderer? From Mademoiselle's story it seems clear that somewhere on her journey she was to meet this man of whom we speak. Her action in getting rid of the maid seems significant. Did the man join the train at Paris? Did she conceal him in the adjoining compartment? If so, they may have quarrelled. He may have killed her in a fit of rage. That is one possibility. The other, and the more likely to my mind, is that her assailant was a train robber travelling on the train, and that he stole along the corridor unseen by the conductor and killed her, and went off with the red morocco case, which doubtless contained jewels of some value. In all probability, he left the train at Lyon, and we have already telegraphed to the station for their full particulars of anyone seen leaving the train. Or he might have come on at Nice, suggested Poirot. He might, agreed the commissary, but that would be a very bold course. Poirot let a minute or two go by before speaking, and then he said, In the latter case, do you think the man was an ordinary train robber? The commissary shrugged his shoulders. It depends. We must get hold of the maid. It is possible that she has the red morocco case with her. If so, then the man of whom she spoke to Mademoiselle may be concerned in the case, and the affair is a crime of passion. I think myself the solution of a train robbery is the most plausible. These bandits have become very bold of late. Poirot looked suddenly across to Catherine. And you, mademoiselle? You said you heard and saw nothing during the night? Nothing, said Catherine. Poirot turned to the commissary. We need to detain mademoiselle no longer, I think, he suggested. The latter nodded. She will leave us his address, he said. Catherine gave him the name of Lady Tamplin's villa. Poirot made a little bow. You permit that I see you again, mademoiselle? He said. Or have you so many friends that your time will all be taken up? On the contrary, said Catherine, I have plenty of leisure, and I shall be very pleased to see you again. Excellent, said Poirot, and he gave her a little friendly nod. This shall be a roman policier à nous. We will investigate this affair together.